Welcome to episode 30 of the Within the Boggart Wood podcast. To begin, two new lovely people have joined the Court of Boggart's Patreon tier since the last episode, so huge thanks go to Ben Jackson Ling and Carol Powell for their support. Secondly, just to let you all know that the Halloween episode was recorded this Monday. The Court of Boggarts had been invited to join in via Zoom, and we were also joined by the fantastic Eleanor and Martin from the Three Ravens podcast. Much fun was had by all, with some rather spooky stories shared. So make sure you have a listen to that one, which will be released on the 31st of October. Today's first story sees us in County Durham and the sleepy village of Brancepeth. Brancepeth is located 4 miles southwest of Durham City, and has a fairly extensive and interesting history, with human usage of the land dating back at least 5,000 years, with the remains of a flint knapping site being found just off Woolsingham Road to the northwest of the village in 1983. A number of general prehistoric flint scatters have also been found in the vicinity of the village over the years, and at nearby Stockley Beck there's a presumed Bronze Age burial mound. Brancepeth also supports a Roman road aligned northeast to southwest through the village, and random finds of Roman pottery and a Roman glass bead have suggested the presence of a Roman settlement in the area. Brancepeth Castle was first built in the 12th century for the Bulmer family, who passed it to the Neville family, the then Earls of Westmoreland, and until very recently it was thought that this was the first post-Roman evidence of occupation in the village. However, in 1998, the Church of St Brandon, built in the grounds of the castle, and originally thought to have been built at the time of the original castle, suffered a major fire. Essentially, the tower of the church acted as a blast furnace, destroying the roof and its internal workings. The timber interior elements destroyed in the fire had been 17th century in date, and had been described as some of the most remarkable wood carvings to be found in a church anywhere in Britain. During the restoration works, the remains of an earlier church were found on the site, potentially dating an original building there as Anglo-Saxon. A number of 11th century grave covers were also found built into the 12th century walls. Now, I was actually one of the archaeologists that worked on the initial stages of the church restoration. Initially, the interior of the church had been strengthened with a scaffold framework to allow the team to work safely. I do remember thinking how peculiar everything looked, as the lead roof had melted in the heat of the fire and sealed areas of the floor, again with half-melted artefacts sticking out of the cool lead. I also recalled some spooky strangers as we worked. A couple of the archaeologists present insisted that they saw fleeting white shapes at the edge of their vision, and began to feel a little spooked. I didn't see anything personally, though did experience the major oddity of tools vanishing. Picture the scene, each archaeologist working in a separate area, where you had to climber through the support and scaffold network to get there. Once in position, you were equipped with hand-digging tools, recording equipment, and a bucket for spoil. Once you'd filled the bucket, you then had to clamber out through the network of scaffolding again and deposit your bucket in a skip. It wasn't an easy task just to move around. So it became increasingly strange when the tools began to disappear. A spade here, a trowel there. For me it occurred twice. Both times I was filling a bucket with debris using a trowel and a small coal shovel. I'd fill the bucket, go to pick up the trowel, and it simply wasn't there anymore. The return to site the next day would find the tools that had gone missing the day before in a small pile on the scaffolding. Over 20 years later, it's still a memory that stays with me, as it's something I couldn't explain at the time. But returning to the history of the castle, the original structure was effectively rebuilt in the late 14th century, then again heavily altered in the 19th century. Though while much of the surrounding area was being industrialised, Brancepeth itself remained coal mine free and was known for its natural beauty, mentioned by poets such as William Wordsworth and Lord Tennyson. The castle of course has developed its own ghost story, with the version popular with the local press being that the castle is haunted by a grey lady, said to be roaming the castle looking for a Scottish king. The second more popular version is that the grey lady is, I do apologise if my pronunciation is wrong, that the Grey Lady is Mary Bellasyse, daughter of Sir Henry Bellasyse, who had bought Brancepeth Castle in 1701. According to folklore, Mary fell in love with a chap called Bobby Shafto, who lived in nearby Whitworth Hall. Bobby only had eyes for another, however, and the tale goes that Mary died of a broken heart, and her restless spirit has roamed her home at Brancepeth since. Mind you, she is also said to haunt the former Beamish Hall, one of Shafto's former residences, as well as Whitworth Hall, so at least in her despair she still gets around a bit. There's also the tale that it wasn't actually Mary, but her sister Bridget who died of a broken heart due to Bobby Shafto. But again, that all depends of course on which Bobby Shafto you're actually talking about. The first Bobby Shafto was a Tory Member of Parliament who gained the family estates in 1742 on the death of his father. He coined the nickname Bonnie Bobby Shafto during elections and became the focus of the song Bobby Shafto's Gone to Sea, said to relate the tale of his unfortunate effect on Bridget Bellasyse. Some historians, however, argue that this likely referred to a relative of his, also Robert Shafto of Benwell, or in fact his grandson, also Robert Shafto, a century later. At this point, moving swiftly away from grey ladies in the castle, we come to Brancepeth's most famous story, that of the Brancepeth Brawn. Writing in the early 19th century, the Brawn of Brancepeth, says Surtees, was a formidable animal which made its lair on Brandon Hill and walked the forest in ancient undisputed sovereignty from the Weir to the Gaunless. The marshy and then woody vale, extending from Croxdale to Ferrywood, was one of the Brawn's favourite haunts, affording roots and mast and the luxurious pleasure of volutation. Near Cleves Cross, Hodge of Ferry, after carefully marking the boar's track, dug a pitfall, slightly covered with boughs and turf, and then tolling on his victim by some bait to the treacherous spot, stood armed with his good sword across the pitfall. At length the gallant brute came trotting on his onward path, and seeing the passage barred, rushed headlong on the pitfall. The story has nothing very improbable, and something like real evidence still exists. According to all tradition, the rustic champion of Cleves sleeps beneath a coffin-shaped stone in Merrington churchyard, rudely sculptured with the instruments of his victory, a sword and spade on each side of the cross. The area was also home to another ghost, described by William Brockie in his book Legends and Superstitions of the County of Durham in 1886. On St Thomas Eve, the 20th of December, the ghost of a murdered woman long used to alarm the carriers and waggoners and their fare of country folks. Leaving the city of Durham in the lane between Cradlewell and Neville's Cross on the road to Brancepeth, with her child dangling at her side, she used to join particular parties, enter the vehicles and there seat herself. The other passengers never had the courage to address her, which, if they had done, the spell would have been broken. She always disappeared at a certain part of the road, which must have been the limit of her hapless pilgrimage. In the same neighbourhood there was another goblin, if indeed it was not the same. It was the ghost of Jane Ramshaw, an unfortunate woman of the city of Durham, who was decoyed from her house at night and murdered about the year 1789. This horrid deed caused a great sensation, and several persons were examined before the magistrates, but the perpetrator of it was never brought to justice. There was a rumour, Sykes says, that a soldier on his deathbed on the continent confessed that he was the murderer, but if he really was so, his confession did not cause the poor unavenged ghost to cease to walk, for it continued to do so down to a comparatively recent period. The place where Jeanie used to make her appearance was at the Flass Well, on the North Road, not far from where Durham Infirmary now stands, and she would frequently flit about the neighbouring fields, or along the road leading to Brancepeth, called the Peth, at the foot of the Red Hills, not far from where the Brawn appeared. In her time, that is to say, before railways became rife, this road was very much frequented, particularly on market nights, and there were very few of the pitmen indeed who had not seen Jeanie. This episode from the archive section comes from the South Bank Express on the 23rd of September 1916 and is entitled Redcar Ghost. After several weeks of anxiety among the inhabitants of Redcar district, who appeared twice nightly to await the appearance of the mysterious being which is supposed to be in residence at a small cottage close to Redcar Pier, the mystery is to all intents now cleared up. Night after night, huge crowds have wandered to the haunted cottage to see and hear the strange doings of this mystic absurdity, and some, we hear, so anxious to catch a glimpse of the spirit, were caught striking matches, and will in all probability pay rather dearly for their curiosity at the next court. You can fool sometime, but not all the time, so that they who are foolish enough to wander into the darkness of the night to disturb the peace of others for fun and fancy must pay for their experience, and perhaps it will teach them that curiosity is only a mild softening of the brain utilised by those with an ingenious turn of mind, given to idle gossip and mischief, with a view to scaring others. However, the spirit has been located, the enterprising manager at Bentley's wine store, Redcar, having successfully bottled a large quantity of the famous Saltskar blend whisky, but owing to the licensing restrictions, can only be seen during prohibited hours. Acklam Hall is located in Acklam, Middlesbrough, and currently serves as a venue for weddings, private parties, meetings, business offices and a restaurant. The hall is a Grade 1 listed building, built in around 1680, but on land mentioned in the Domesday Book of the 11th century. The medieval manor at Acklam was held by the Earl of Chester in the late 11th century, and passed through the hands of the families de Bruce, de Thwengs, the Darcys and the Strangeways, before being inherited by the de Acklams in the early 13th century. Ingram de Boynton then gained the manor through marriage to Joan de Acklam, and the estate stayed with the Boynton family until 1637, when the then Acklam Grange was sold to William Hustler. Hustler was a wealthy businessman and draper from Bridlington. He passed the estate to his son, then again it was passed to his grandson, Sir William Hustler, in the late 1680s. William ordered the construction of a new house, and the hall as it stands today was built. The location of the original Acklam Grange is unknown. It is thought that the Hustlers' new home was completed in 1683, set within 40 acres of land with formal gardens and the approach road lined with lime and fir trees. The hall remained the Hustler family home until 1928, though the time between building the hall and selling it was not without issue. In 1829 a huge storm hit the country, and it was reported that the hall was damaged and that many of the trees along the approach had been blown down. In 1845, the then owner Thomas Hustler added the attic story as well as other additions, and in 1912 a new dining room and kitchen was built. In 1928 the hall left the ownership of the Hustler family and was sold to the Middlesbrough Corporation, and in 1935 it was converted to Acklam Hall School. 1958 saw the removal of most of the formal gardens to make way for the extensions to the then Acklam Hall Grammar School, with further construction taking place between 1969 and 1974, when the school split between Kings Manor School and Acklam Sixth Form College. The main school block was unfortunately ravaged by fire and later demolished in 1997. In 2008 work began on restoring the building when it was vacated by Middlesbrough College. In 2011, however, Middlesbrough Council announced its wish to sell the hall to private developers, with the sale and restoration resulting in the Acklam Hall we now know today. Of course, no 17th century manor house would be complete without the odd ghost story or two. In 1997, a workman was in the cellar when he became suddenly aware that he was being observed by a young boy dressed in what he described as ragged Victorian clothing. The boy turned and darted into a side room in the cellar, but when the workman looked after him he'd vanished and there was no other exit to the room. An earlier report came in 1967, when a caretaker claimed that his dog would never go into the library after experiencing something strange there. Apparently though, the hall's prevalent ghost, according to the local press, is the Grey Lady, said to haunt the main 17th century staircase. Apparently during its time as a school, Acklam Hall's teachers and pupils often reported sighting her at the head of the stairs when she would simply disappear. Local ghost hunters have apparently suggested that the Grey Lady is Charlotte Hustler, who allegedly died in childbirth in the early 19th century. Interestingly, there were two Charlotte Hustlers associated with Acklam Hall in the early 1800s. The first was Charlotte Mead Hustler, wife of William. She died on the 25th of December 1801 at the age of 20, 4 months after giving birth to their son, Thomas. So while the name fits, the dying in childbirth tale doesn't. Also, the couple appeared not to have lived in Acklam Hall at all. Instead, they lived in St George in Barbados. According to birth and death records, Charlotte gave birth to Thomas in Barbados and also died there. Next we have Charlotte Hustler, Lady of the Hall when the 1841 census was taken. Originally Charlotte Wells, Thomas had married her in 1822. However, she appears to have died in 1873 aged 72, and certainly not in childbirth. So it seems that the story of the origins of the Grey Lady are a mix of vague historical knowledge mixed with storytelling, and as with such stories I've unfortunately had real difficulty finding any reference to the Grey Lady story itself beyond stories appearing in the last 15 years. The earliest mention I could find was a Paranormal Forum article dated from 2009, which stated that the Grey Lady would often frighten kids at the school on the back stairs. Then there's a BBC article from 2014 mentioning Charlotte as dying around the year 1800, which may fit into the wife of William Hustler theory, who died in 1801, but the article then goes on to say she's buried locally, whereas according to burial records, William's wife Charlotte, who died in 1801, was, as mentioned before, actually buried in St George Parish Church in Barbados. The second Charlotte Hustler, Lady of the Hall, who died in 1873, is buried in the churchyard, but the dates don't match with the story the BBC was presenting. In 2017, the owner of the hall gave a talk to Tees Business about the history of the hall, and mentioned the Grey Lady as being the focus of the caretaker's fright in the library in 1967, but said that the Grey Lady is said to have fallen to her death at the hall, rather than the popular version of the story which has her dying in childbirth. There's then a mention of her in a small article on Haunted Teesside in 2018. In 2022 it was covered by Alan Robson's Night Owls, and following that there was a rash of newspaper articles about it. You also have entries online by the Teesside Archives stating that the Grey Lady has been seen on several occasions by members of staff over the years, but no names or reference. Tees Valley Museums mentioned the tale in their 2023 Halloween brochure. So we have a mystery on our hands. Initially, ghost stories about the place seem to have revolved around a Victorian boy and a spooky experience in the library, but then we have the seemingly sudden development of a Grey Lady on either the main or the back stairs, depending on the story, and who may have died by falling, or may have died in childbirth, and may in fact have been Charlotte Hustler. The story would have fit nicely with the early history of Charlotte Mead Hustler, if she had not in fact died 4 months after giving birth, and again, as mentioned, in Barbados. So who, if she exists, is the Grey Lady of Acklam Hall? I'm sure ghost hunts at the hall will continue to delve into that very question. One interesting item that did crop up in my research on Acklam Hall was the small entry in the Newcastle Courant of December 25th, 1840. There was lately killed on the estate of T. Hustler Esquire of Acklam Hall in Cleveland an animal whose head resembled that of a fox, its body bore the resemblance of the cat, being somewhat shorter and stronger in its legs, and its tail was similar to the otter. It was of a dark grey colour and measured from its nose to the tip of its tail 2 feet and 10 inches. So Acklam Hall can also boast one of the first cryptozoological reports from the northeast in the 19th century, unless that is perhaps one of the hustlers in their American adventures brought back a jaguarundi as a souvenir, but decided that the animal was just too wild to keep around. Thanks for listening to episode 30. I hope you enjoyed these stories. And remember, if you have any ghostly encounters of your own, please get in touch. So, until the Halloween episode, stay safe and of course, stay spooky.